Can your landlord keep your security deposit for painting? And the answer is sometimes, but not just because they feel like repainting the apartment, and not just because the walls look used after you live there. There is a big difference between normal wear and tear, which is the landlord's responsibility, and actual damage caused by the tenant, which is your responsibility. So in this video, I'm going to explain when a painting charge might be legitimate and when it might be illegal or inflated, and what to look for if your landlord kept your deposit for repainting. And a quick disclaimer, this is legal information, not legal advice. Security deposit laws vary by state, so you always need to check your own state's rules. Here's the basic rule. A landlord usually cannot charge for normal wear and tear. Normal wear and tear means the ordinary aging that happens when someone lives in a rental. Paint fades, walls get a little dull, there may be a few small nail holes from hanging pictures, and furniture may leave minor scuffs. That is ordinary use. That is not the same as damage. A landlord owns a rental property. Part of owning a rental property is maintaining it in between tenants. Repainting after a tenant has lived there for a normal amount of time is often just part of doing business. So if your landlord says we always repaint between tenants, so we charged you, that might be a problem. Because the question isn't, did the landlord repaint? The question is, did the tenant cause damage that made repainting necessary? Now, there are situations where a painting deduction is legitimate. For example, if you painted the walls a different color without permission, if you left large holes, gouges, or major wall damage, if there were heavy stains, smoke damage, candle soot, grease, crayon, marker, or pet-related damages, if you removed fixtures, shelves, or wall-mounted items and left serious damage behind, if the wall condition was clearly worse than ordinary use. In those situations, the landlord may be able to deduct a reasonable amount from the security deposit. But there's an important word there, and that's reasonable. They do not automatically get to charge you whatever they want. They generally need to show what was damaged, why the painting was necessary, what it costs, and why the amount they charged you was connected to your tenancy. Here's one of the biggest red flags. The tenant damages one room or one wall, but the landlord charges them to repaint the entire apartment. That's where a lot of deductions become inflated. And let's say there was actual damage on one bedroom wall. Maybe you had a TV mount or a shelf and the wall needed patching and repainting. That doesn't automatically mean the landlord can charge you to repaint the living room, the kitchen, the hallway, bathroom, and every bedroom. The deduction should match the damage. If only one wall needed repair, the charge should usually be tied to that wall. If one room needed repainting, the charge should usually be tied to that one room. A landlord should not use one damaged spot as an excuse to renovate the whole unit at your expense. So if your itemized deduction says something vague like full repainting, $2,500, ask yourself what exactly was damaged? Where was it damaged? Did the landlord show photos? Did they show an invoice? Did they explain why the whole unit needed repainting? Or did they just use your deposit to refresh the apartment for the next tenant? That distinction makes a huge difference. Another important issue is the age of the paint. Paint does not last forever. If the walls were freshly painted right before you moved in and you seriously damaged them after 6 months, that's one thing. But if the paint was already old when you moved in, or you lived there for several years, the landlord may have a much weaker argument for charging you full price. Why is that? Because the landlord is not supposed to get a brand new improvement at the tenant's expense when the old paint had already aged through normal use. This is called depreciation. That just means things lose value over time. Paint, carpet, appliances, blinds, they all have a useful life. So if your landlord charges you the full cost of brand new paint, ask, how old was the paint when I moved in? How long did I live there? Was the repainting actually because of damage or because it was time to repaint anyway? Did they charge me for the full job even though the paint was already several years old? That can be a strong issue in a deposit dispute, and generally speaking, paint has a 3 to 5 year useful life, and if it hasn't been repainted in that time period, it's not your responsibility to foot the whole bill. Now let's talk about proof. In most security deposit disputes, the landlord has the burden of proving the deduction. That means the landlord should be able to show evidence, and not just say, hey, the walls were bad. They need actual evidence, photos, move in condition reports, move out photos, invoices, receipts, an itemized deduction list, and a timeline. Most states require the landlord to return the deposit or send an itemized list of deductions by a specific deadline after move out, and that is usually 15 to 45 days, depending on the state. If they miss that deadline, they often forfeit the right to deduct anything at all. So if your landlord kept money for painting, look closely at the paperwork. Did they send an itemized list? Was it on time? Did it explain the charge clearly? Did they provide receipts or estimates? Did they show actual damage? Did they distinguish between damage and normal wear? If not, that deduction may be worth challenging. So, can your landlord keep your deposit for painting? Here's the simplest way to think about it. If the painting was because of normal fading, ordinary use, small nail holes, or routine turnover, probably not. If the painting was because you caused actual damage beyond normal wear and tear, then yes. But even then, the charge should be reasonable, documented, and limited to the damage you actually caused. They should not charge you to repaint more of the rental than your tenancy actually damaged. They should not charge you full replacement cost for old paint. And they should not use vague terms to keep your money without proof. If your landlord kept your deposit for painting, your next step is to gather the facts: your move out date, the deposit amount, the deduction list, any photos you have, any photos or receipts the landlord gave you, and your state's deadlines for returning the deposit or sending deductions. That is what tells you whether this is just annoying or whether you may have a real security deposit claim. I created a free AI case assessment that helps tenants walk through these exact questions. It checks your state's rules, looks at your timeline, and gives you an honest case strength signal. You can find it at landlordkeptmydeposit.com. Again, this is legal information, not legal advice, but do not assume your landlord is allowed to keep your deposit just because they wrote the word painting on a deduction sheet. Sometimes it's legitimate, sometimes it's normal wear and tear, and sometimes it's the exact kind of deduction that tenants should challenge.